The first person to teach me what a promise was worth was my father. The last promise I ever made to him was the one I kept without being asked twice. That's not luck. That's 41 years of a man showing me, one Saturday morning at a time, what it looks like when your word actually means something. My father, Harold Jennings, was not a man who used a lot of words. He used them like they cost money he didn't have to spare. He was the kind of father who taught me to change a tire in the driveway before I was allowed to drive the car, who sat in the bleachers at every wrestling match I ever had in a canvas jacket that smelled like the auto shop he ran for 36 years, and who never once, not one single time, told me he was proud of me out loud. He didn't need to. It was in the way he showed up. Every time. No exceptions. When my mother passed 8 years ago, a Tuesday in October, the kind of gray afternoon that never quite leaves your memory, he didn't fall apart in front of anyone. He grieved the way he'd done everything else in his life, quietly, with his shoulders square, and he kept the house exactly the way she'd left it, because he said changing it would feel like agreeing she was really gone. He never called me struggling, not once in 8 years. He learned to cook 4 dishes, badly, and he ate them anyway. And when I offered to help, he told me a man figures his own kitchen out. So when Harold Jennings called me at 6:15 on a Thursday morning, and his voice sounded like gravel underwater, I didn't ask questions. I didn't think about my schedule. 41 years of that man's example doesn't raise a son who hesitates. It raises a son who moves. What nobody prepares you for is the person standing in your kitchen who decides your father's emergency is a scheduling inconvenience. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, stick around, because this story's going somewhere. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from this morning. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Let me back up and give you the whole picture. My name is Gary Jennings. I'm 62 years old. I spent 30 years teaching high school shop class before I retired, and for the last 19 years I've been married to a woman named Denise. I used to think a quiet house was a peaceful house. I've since learned those are two very different things. It was a Thursday, the 9th of April, 6:15 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because I was standing at the kitchen counter measuring coffee grounds, one scoop short of a full pot, when my phone lit up on the counter beside the toaster. Dad. I picked up before the second ring finished. Dad. Gary. His voice wasn't right. Harold Jennings' voice was supposed to sound like a man who'd spent 4 decades yelling over the noise of an impact wrench. This voice sounded small. Dad, what's wrong? Didn't want to bother you this early. There it is, 79 years old, and still apologizing for needing something. Dad, what's going on? My chest. Feels like somebody's standing on it, and my jaw's aching something fierce. I was already moving toward the hallway closet for my shoes. Are you sitting down? I'm sitting down. Stay sitting down. I'm coming to get you right now. Gary, I'm sure it's just... Dad, I'm coming. I hung up and stood there in the hallway for exactly 2 seconds, doing the math. My truck was in for its annual inspection over at Miller's garage on Route 9. Wouldn't be back till the afternoon. My father lived 11 minutes away on Sycamore Lane, same house I grew up in. Denise's car, a navy blue Lexus SUV she'd leased in January and babied like a newborn, sat in our garage with a full tank because she'd filled it up herself on Tuesday. I could hear her moving around upstairs, blow dryer running. I went to the bottom of the stairs. Denise. The dryer kept running. Denise. It clicked off. A pause, longer than it needed to be. What? Not a question. A demand, disguised as one. I need to borrow the Lexus. My dad's having chest pains and his jaw's aching. I need to get him to Continental Memorial right now. Silence. Then footsteps, unhurried, coming to the top of the stairs. She stood there in her robe, one towel wrapped around her hair, holding her makeup brush like she'd been interrupted mid-thought and hadn't yet decided how annoyed to be about it. Gary, I have my hair appointment at 8. Marcus only has that one slot open all week. Denise, my father might be having a heart attack. Then call an ambulance. He hates hospitals showing up like that. You know this. It upsets him. That's not my problem to solve at 6:15 in the morning. She said it flat, the way you'd read a grocery list. I've had this appointment booked for 3 weeks. I stood absolutely still. Did she actually just... Denise. My voice came out quieter than I expected it to. His jaw is hurting. That's a heart attack symptom. She looked at me with an expression I will remember on the day I die. Not worry. Not even irritation, really. Just inconvenience, pure and simple. The way you'd look at a delayed flight. He's your father, Gary, not mine. A beat. You'll figure something out. You always do. She turned and walked back into the bathroom. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut, soft and final, like she'd just told me we were out of orange juice. Like my father's chest tightening in his recliner on Sycamore Lane was a minor logistics problem she simply didn't have room on her calendar for. I stood in that hallway for one more second, then I pulled out my phone. Ray Delgado lived 3 doors down, retired postal carrier, 68 years old, drove a 15-year-old Buick. He kept spotless out of pure, stubborn pride. He and my father had been friends since before I could remember. Played dominoes together every Sunday afternoon on my dad's back porch, rain or shine. Ray had been a pallbearer at my mother's funeral. He picked up on the first ring. Gary, little early for you. Ray, I need you. My dad's having chest pains, jaws hurting, and I don't have a car right now. Can you drive us to Continental Memorial? No hesitation. None. Give me 90 seconds. That was it. No follow-up questions, no conditions, no hair appointment to think about. 90 seconds. I called my father back immediately. Dad, I'm coming. Ray's driving. Don't move from that chair, you hear me? Gary, I really don't want to make a fuss. Dad, sit still. I mean it. A small sound that might have been a laugh caught in pain. Okay, son. Ray pulled into our driveway in 80 seconds. I counted. We picked up my father 4 minutes later. He was sitting in his recliner exactly where he said he'd be. One hand pressed flat against his chest, sweat beading along his hairline even though the house wasn't warm. He tried to stand up under his own power, and I told him not to bother. Ray and I got him into the back seat between us. And the whole 9-minute drive to Continental Memorial, he kept apologizing. Sorry to pull you out of bed. Ray. Wasn't sleeping anyway. Old habit. Bet it wasn't good sleep either. Never is. Ray glanced at him in the rearview mirror. You just sit tight, Harold. We got you. My father actually managed something close to a smile, and I looked out the window at the gray Ohio morning going by, and I felt 2 things land in my chest at the exact same moment. Gratitude, enormous and specific, for Ray Delgado, and something else. Something cold and still forming for Denise. I didn't examine it yet. I just let it sit there, next to the gratitude, taking up its own quiet space. We checked into the ER at 6:41 a.m. A nurse named Patricia, gray hair pulled back tight, moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen every version of this morning before, got my father into a room within 10 minutes. The doctor on call, a young woman named Dr. Amara Okafor, ordered an EKG and blood work before she'd even finished introducing herself. Mr. Jennings, we're going to run some tests. Chest pain radiating to the jaw. At your age, we take that very seriously. My father looked over at me. There was a question in his eyes he wasn't going to ask out loud. Do everything she says, Dad. He nodded, closed his eyes, and let the nurses work. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours and 12 minutes. Hard plastic chairs, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead, a muted morning talk show playing on a mounted TV. Nobody was watching. I drank vending machine coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Clinton administration and didn't taste a single sip of it. Denise never texted, not one word, not how's your dad, not let me know, nothing. At 9:04, Dr. Okafor came out to find me, her expression careful, serious, but not alarmed. Mr. Jennings, your father had what we're calling a moderate cardiac event. Not a full-blown heart attack, but close enough that his body was sending every warning signal it had. We want to admit him for observation, run some additional imaging, and get his medications adjusted. But he's stable. He's stable. He's also already complained twice about the coffee. I laughed, and it came out rougher than I meant it to. That's him. I called Ray, who'd stayed in the parking lot the entire 2 hours rather than go home, because that's who Ray Delgado was. He's stable, I told him. Thank God. And I could hear he meant every word of it. Ray, I owe you. You don't owe me a thing, Gary. That's just what people do. I let that sentence sit in the air a moment. Some people. I stayed with my father until late afternoon. We watched half a baseball game with the sound down low, and he beat me twice at checkers on a travel set the hospital kept in a drawer, sharper than me even hooked up to monitors. Around 4 o'clock, right before I had to leave to sort out his prescriptions at the pharmacy, he took my hand. His grip was still strong, surprisingly strong. Gary. Yeah, Dad. Denise didn't come. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer right away. She had her hair appointment. Just that. That's all it needed to be. He looked at me for a long moment. 79 years old, hospital blanket pulled up to his waist, eyes clear as anything. He didn't say a word about Denise. He just nodded, slow, and turned his head toward the window where the afternoon light was hitting the parking lot in that flat gold way it does in early spring. Something moved across his face, something that looked a great deal like a decision being made and quietly filed away. I kissed his forehead before I left, walked out into the cool April air, and somewhere on the drive home, watching the strip malls go by, I realized I wasn't angry at Denise. Not yet, anyway. I was something past angry. I was finished. If you've stuck with me this far, do me a favor and hit subscribe. Costs you nothing, means a lot on this end. Drop your thoughts below, too. I read every one of them. Some people spend a marriage making withdrawals from an account they never once deposited into. Denise had been overdrawn for longer than I wanted to admit. Friday, the 10th of April, 5:50 in the morning. I woke before my alarm, which tells you something sitting on your chest heavier than sleep can carry. I lay there on my side of the bed, same side I'd slept on for 19 years, and stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles in the dark. Denise was still asleep beside me, breathing even, completely undisturbed, like the whole previous day had simply washed off her in the shower. I got up quietly, went down to the kitchen, made coffee the loud way, the way that always seemed to bother her on weekend mornings. Didn't feel bad about it, not even slightly. She'd chosen a hair appointment over her father-in-law's chest pains. She could survive a coffee grinder. I sat at the table and watched the sky lighten over the backyard. My phone sat face down beside my mug. No messages from Continental Memorial overnight. No news is good news at 6 in the morning. I thought about my father in that hospital bed, small against the pillows in a way he'd never once looked in his life. About the way he'd said, Denise didn't come, without a shred of self-pity in his voice, just fact. Laid out plain the way he laid out everything. About how he never once, in 79 years, chose himself over someone who needed him. I heard Denise on the stairs around 6:40. She came into the kitchen in her bathrobe, glanced at the coffee maker, then at me. You're up early. Every morning for 19 years, I said. Didn't realize that still surprised you. She poured herself a cup, leaned against the counter. There was a silence. The specific married kind. The kind that's waiting on someone to say the thing out loud. She finally said it. How's Harold? Harold. Not your dad. Not Dad. Harold. Like he was a neighbor she vaguely recognized. Stable, I said. Moderate cardiac event. They're keeping him another day for observation. She repeated it slowly, tasting the words like they were unfamiliar to her tongue. Another silence. How was the appointment? I asked. She blinked just once, but I caught it. It was fine. Then, carefully, Gary, yesterday was a lot for me too, you know. I want you to understand that. A lot for her. I let that sit between us. Your father-in-law was having a possible heart attack, and you were getting your roots done. But sure, a lot. Gary. Denise. I said her name the same flat, final way my father had said hers the day before. Just the name. Nothing else needed. She stopped talking. I'm not doing this right now, I said. I rinsed my mug, set it in the rack, picked up my keys, my jacket, the spare set for the truck since it was still at Miller's. Where are you going? To see my father. I didn't look back on my way out. Ray drove me again. Didn't ask a single question, just had the radio on low, some classic country station, one hand loose on the wheel. There's a kind of friendship that doesn't need conversation to function. Ray and I had always had that. We parked at Continental Memorial at 7:55. I'll wait right here, he said. Ray, You don't have to sit in a parking lot all morning. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. I'll be here, Gary. Some people just show up. You learn to notice which ones. My father was sitting upright when I walked in, color back in his cheeks, the gravel gone from his voice. He'd talked the nurses into letting him keep his own flannel shirt on over the hospital gown, reading glasses perched on his nose, a folded newspaper on his lap open to the crossword. 6 letters, he said, not even looking up. Disloyal. I stopped in the doorway and stared at him. He glanced up over his glasses, face perfectly straight. For the puzzle, Gary. I laughed so hard a nurse stuck her head in to check on us. Nailed it, I said, dropping into the chair beside his bed. Disloyal. He counted the boxes, filled it in, nodded with grim satisfaction. Still sharp as a tack. You raised me, Dad. And still the sharp one. Terry. We sat like that a while, easy, the comfortable quiet of 2 people who'd loved each other long enough not to need to fill every second of it. He finished a few more clues. I drank hospital coffee that tasted like a punishment and didn't say a word about it, because being in that room with him, even in a hard chair under bad lighting, was exactly where I needed to be. Then he set the newspaper down on the tray table and folded his hands. I want to call Elaine Whitfield this morning, he said. Elaine Whitfield, attorney, 34 years practicing law out of the same storefront office on Center Street. She'd handled my mother's estate paperwork. She'd drawn up my father's will nearly a decade ago. Sharp, exacting, the kind of lawyer who let a silence sit until you filled it with the truth. I kept my voice even. Okay. Been thinking about it since yesterday. Dad, you don't have to. Harold Gary Jennings, he caught himself, laughed at his own mistake, shook his head. Gary Harold Jennings, don't you finish that sentence. I hadn't heard him use my full name like that since I was 16, and came home an hour past curfew smelling like somebody else's cigarettes. He looked at me with those clear, steady eyes, morning light coming through the window behind him, and for a second he looked younger than I'd seen him look in years. Or maybe he just looked exactly like himself. I worked 36 years in that garage, he said quietly. Your mother and I scraped and saved so what we built would land somewhere that mattered, somewhere it would mean something. A pause. With people who show up. I didn't say a word. Denise didn't show up, Gary. I know, Dad. Not just yesterday. He picked the newspaper back up, not to work on it, just to have something to hold. Not at your mother's funeral, when she left early for a work call. Not when I had my hip replaced and needed rides to physical therapy for 6 weeks, and it was always somehow inconvenient. Not last Thanksgiving when I had that fall in the driveway, and she said you were probably overreacting. He looked up, and not yesterday, when my heart was telling me something was wrong. Every example landed like a stone dropped into still water, because he was right. He'd always been right, and I'd spent years making excuses on her behalf that she'd never once earned. I'm not angry, he said. And the remarkable part was, he wasn't. His voice stayed level, steady as a hand on a workbench. I'm just being accurate. He reached for the folded slip of paper tucked inside his eyeglass case, a phone number written in his own careful, blocky handwriting. He'd come prepared. My father didn't make impulsive decisions. This had been sitting in him a lot longer than one hospital stay. You want me to step out? I asked. He considered it. No. Stay. Stay. One word, and something in my chest went still and grateful all at once. He dialed at 8:50. She picked up on the second ring. Elaine Whitfield. Elaine, it's Harold Jennings. Hope I'm not catching you too early. Harold. Her voice warmed immediately. Never too early for you. How are you holding up? I'm in the hospital, actually. Continental Memorial. A brief pause. I'm sorry to hear that. Serious? Serious enough to clear my thinking some. Even from a hospital bed, the morning after a cardiac scare, there was a steadiness in his voice, a dignity that couldn't be faked, built over 79 years of doing the right thing, even when it cost him. Elaine, I need to update my will. I have some specific changes in mind. Silence on her end. Professional silence, absorbing, not stalling. Of course, Harold. Want me to come to you? If you could. Today. If it's not too much trouble. I can be there by 2. Perfect. He glanced at me. My son will be here. I'll see you at 2, Harold. He hung up, set the phone on the tray table, and picked the newspaper back up like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just quietly and permanently rearranged the entire architecture of his life. Dad, my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. You don't have to do this for me. He didn't look up from the crossword. I'm not doing it for you, Gary. He filled in a letter, calm, deliberate. I'm doing it because I earned the right to decide where my life's work goes. And I've decided. He glanced up over his glasses. Questions? I had roughly 30. I asked none of them. No, sir. Good. Back to the puzzle. Now go find me something edible in that cafeteria. Whatever they served me for breakfast tasted like a decision somebody regretted. Elaine Whitfield arrived at 1:57 that afternoon. Gray suit, leather folder, reading glasses pushed up into short white hair. She shook my hand firmly, sat down across from my father with a legal pad and a pen that looked like it cost more than my last car payment. I sat in the corner, quiet, a witness to something I understood I wasn't meant to narrate. Their conversation ran 40 minutes. I won't lay out every word here. Some things a family keeps to itself. But I'll tell you this much. By the time Elaine capped her pen and slid the legal pad back into her folder, the document Denise had been quietly counting on for 19 years of marriage had been completely, deliberately, and legally rewritten. The house on Sycamore Lane, paid off free and clear since 2011. The retirement accounts my father had built, dollar by dollar, over 3.5 decades at the garage. The 1972 Chevelle he'd restored himself in the garage behind the house, the one that still started on the first turn of the key, the one that smelled like motor oil and cut grass every summer when he pulled the tarp off it, and $11,000 set aside specifically for the volunteer fire department in town, because my father had ridden along with them every Wednesday night for 9 years after he retired, because that's simply who he was. Denise's name appeared nowhere in that document, not once. Not my problem, someone had said. Turns out that cut both ways. When Elaine stood to leave, she shook my hand at the door and glanced back at my father, already settled back into his crossword, unbothered, completely himself. Your father, she said quietly, is one of the sharpest men I've worked with in 34 years. I looked at him too. Yeah, I know. I've always known. I left the hospital at 4:20. Ray drove me home, glanced over once, read my face the way old friends do, not digging for information, just checking I was still upright. You good? Yeah, I said. Everything's exactly the way it should be. He nodded. Put the Buick in drive. My phone stayed quiet in my pocket the whole ride. Denise hadn't called once all day. She had no idea. Not the faintest idea what had just happened 40 minutes from her hair salon. But she would. Saturday, the 11th of April, 8:20 in the morning. I was standing at the counter at Miller's garage, signing the invoice for the truck, brand new inspection sticker, oil changed, and a set of wiper blades I hadn't asked for, that Miller threw in anyway, because our boys had played Little League together 20-some years back, and that's just what neighbors did around here. My phone buzzed against the counter. Denise. I let it ring out. Not strategy. I just didn't have anything worth saying yet. Not the way it needed saying. I finished signing, shook Miller's hand, walked out into a cold, clean Ohio morning, started the truck, and sat there a minute letting my breath fog the windshield, thinking about my father, about bringing him home to Sycamore Lane, where he belonged, about getting him settled in his own kitchen, with his own coffee, and his own crossword, and his dignity fully intact. That's what the day was about. Not Denise, not the calls. My phone buzzed again. Denise, then again, a third time, a fourth. Something's happening. I pulled out of the garage lot and headed for Continental Memorial. I had a father to bring home. He was ready when I got there, dressed in his own clothes, small bag packed, Patricia the nurse walking alongside him, and another nurse pushing the wheelchair hospital policy required. My father stood up out of that chair the second he cleared the automatic doors. I can walk to my son's truck just fine, he announced to the parking lot generally. I had a cardiac event, not a personality transplant. Patricia laughed, the real kind. She took his hand in both of hers. You take care of yourself, Mr. Jennings. Always do, sweetheart. He squeezed her hand. You're one of the good ones. Even leaving a hospital, my father left people better than he found them. I held the door open. He climbed in slow but entirely on his own, which mattered to him more than any doctor's order ever would. I walked around, got in, and he glanced down at my phone, lit up in the cup holder. Denise, 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 Denise. 14 missed calls before 9 in the morning. He said nothing, just clicked his seatbelt and looked out the window, faint and satisfied, like a man who'd made peace with the decision. I got him back to Sycamore Lane first. Same white house with the black shutters, same porch he'd swept clean every Sunday of my childhood, same welcome mat worn so faded neither of us usually noticed the word anymore. I noticed it that morning. I got him settled, made him tea, the specific way, one bag steeped exactly 3 minutes, because he'd told me once years ago, and I never forgot it. Checked his thermostat, checked his refrigerator, went through his new prescriptions, one label at a time, while he sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around his mug. Sit, he said. I sat. He reached across and covered my hand with his. Same hands that taught me to change a tire and swing a bat and shake another man's hand like I meant it. I need you to hear something, he said. What I did with the will wasn't about punishing Denise. His eyes were steady, no anger anywhere in them. Your mother and I built something together, and it belongs with people who understand what building something together actually costs. He squeezed my hand once. You understand that. I do. And Gary. His voice dropped, more deliberate, not softer. I need you thinking about your own life now, not the money. Whether you're happy, whether you're loved the way a man ought to be loved. He looked at me a long moment. You've been showing up alone for a long time, son. A man who shows up deserves somebody standing beside him when he does. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the block. My throat tightened, and I didn't look away from him. I know, Dad, I said, rough and honest. He nodded once, patted my hand twice, the way he'd patted my shoulder in that hospital bed 2 days before. Good. He picked his tea back up. Now, you going to answer that phone or let it rattle itself off the table? It was buzzing again. Denise. Call number 22. I looked at it, looked at him. He raised one eyebrow. I turned it face down and let it buzz itself quiet. Not yet, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not yet, he repeated, like he was testing the patience of it on his tongue. I left Sycamore Lane a little after 1, drove home, parked behind Denise's Lexus, sat in the truck a full minute. 31 missed calls. 31. I went inside. She was on the edge of the couch in yesterday's clothes, both hands wrapped around her phone like it was the last solid thing in the room. She looked up the second the door opened. Her eyes were red-rimmed, sleepless. Something in her face had cracked open that I'd never once seen in 19 years. Gary, I've been calling all day. I know, I said. I hung my keys on the hook and thought about my father in that recliner with his hand pressed to his chest, about Dr. Okafor's careful voice, about a salon chair and a bottle of hair color, while a man's heart sent up every warning flare it had left. I let that sit in my chest exactly 1 second. Then I looked at her. Did you know? Her voice cracked. About the will? No, Gary. I swear I didn't know. I found out with the bank this morning. They called about the joint accounts and she pressed her fingers to her mouth, tried to steady herself. Do you understand what this means? I understand exactly what it means. Then talk to him. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him I would have come if I'd really understood how serious. You just what? She stopped. I took 1 step toward her, not angry, just present in a way I hadn't let myself be in years, because I finally had nothing left in me to protect. You had a hair appointment, I said, while my father sat in a recliner with his chest caving in. While I drank machine coffee in a waiting room for 2 hours, not knowing if he'd make it through the morning. While Ray Delgado sat in a parking lot for 2 hours, because that's what people who love you actually do. The color drained out of her face slow, the way water drains from a glass. He made his decision the same way you made yours, I said, clearly, without asking anybody's permission. Gary, please. He's spent 79 years showing up. For my mother, for me, for people he barely knew who needed a hand. He's never once, not one time, chosen a salon chair over somebody who needed him. I looked at her, A long moment. He just finally stopped expecting you to be capable of the same thing. The room went completely still. She looked at me, really looked, maybe for the first time and longer than either of us wanted to admit. And I watched something move behind her eyes that went past fear now, into something heavier. The look of a person finally grasping the full size of what she'd thrown away. Not the money. Me. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at it. My father's name lit up the screen. She looked back up at me, eyes wide, something in them that might have been hope. I held her gaze one more second and felt something that had been pulled tight for 19 years finally go slack. Not anger. Just release. I lifted my keys off the hook. Going to check on my father, I said. I opened the door. The cool Ohio air hit me clean and honest. I turned back once. You should probably answer that. I shut the door behind me and exhaled, the kind that comes from someplace so deep you didn't even know you'd been holding your breath there. I stood on that porch a moment, the April air settling over me, and something I hadn't felt in years finally arrived and stayed. Clarity, not bitterness. Not the hot flash of a man finally fed up. Just the plain, quiet clarity of a man who'd spent 19 years smoothing things over, sleeping on the same side of the bed, leaving room for someone who never once moved toward him, finally seeing his own life exactly as it was. I hadn't been married for 19 years. I'd been enduring for 19 years. Those are two very different things. Standing on that porch, with my father's voice still fresh in my ears and Denise's face still fixed in my mind, I understood it completely. The hospital hadn't planted anything new in me. It had simply burned away everything that had been covering up what was already true. I walked to the truck, started the engine, let the radio come up low, something old, something my father used to hum over an open hood on a Saturday morning. I didn't decide anything else that night beyond the one thing. I wasn't going back inside that house. Not that night. And somewhere in the place where a man knows things before he's ready to say them out loud, I understood it wasn't just that night either. Loyalty gets remembered. So does its absence. If this one got to you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next story.